Moldova country lying in the northeastern corner of the Balkan region of Europe. Its capital city is Chisinau, located in the south-central part of the country. Moldova, an Eastern European country and former Soviet republic, has varied terrain including forests, rocky hills, and vineyards. Its wine regions include Nistrin, known for reds, and Kadru, home to some of the world's largest cellars. Capital Chisinau has Soviet-style architecture and the National Museum of History, exhibiting art and ethnographic collections that reflect cultural links with neighboring Romania. Land: Moldova is bounded by Ukraine to the north, east, and south, and by Romania to the west. The bulk of the republic lies between the great meandering Prut and Dniester rivers. Plant and animal life: northern and central Moldova is a forest zone, while a steppe belt crosses the south. There are more than 1,500 species of plants in the republic, with scenic expanses of forest covering about 1,150 square miles of particular importance, especially in the central Kadri Hills region. The most common trees are hornbeam and oak, followed by a rich variety including linden, maple, wild pear, and wild cherry. Beech forests are found at the sources of the Ikl and Baku rivers. At the beginning of the 19th century, forests covered about 1/3 of the country. The animal life of Moldova is rich, despite the republic's small size. Mammals include wild boar, wolves, badgers, wildcats, ermines, martens, and polecats. Roe deer, hare, foxes, and muskrat are of commercial importance. Siberian stags, fallow deer, and spotted deer also were successively introduced and are now prevalent. There are many species of birds, both resident and migratory. The marshy lower reaches of Moldova's rivers provide sanctuary for wild geese, migratory ducks, and herons, while white-tailed sea eagles are found in the floodplain forests. People of Moldova. Ethnic groups: about 3/4 of Moldova's population consist of ethnic Moldovans. There are smaller populations of Ukrainians, Russians, Gagos, Roma, and Bulgarians. The Ukrainian population of Moldova, the largest minority group, is divided between those who are native to the country and those who migrated to Moldova during the periods of Russian and Soviet control. The former group makes up the majority of Ukrainians in Moldova. Moldova's Russian population arrived during the periods of Russian imperial and Soviet rule, usually as civil servants and laborers. The Gagos, a mainly rural people, have lived on the Bujik Plain since the late 18th century. The country's ethnic Bulgarians also are mainly rural and inhabit the southern districts where they settled at the end of the 18th century. Only a small percentage of Moldovan citizens identify themselves as Roma. Languages: Moldovan is designated as the country's official language in the constitution. During the Russian imperial and Soviet periods, the Moldavian language was written in the Cyrillic alphabet. Soviet scholars, mainly for political reasons, insisted that this language was an independent Romance language that was distinct from Daco-Romanian. In fact, Daco-Romanian and Moldovan are virtually identical, and differences between the two are confined to phonetics and vocabulary. In 1989, the script of the Moldovan language was changed to the Latin alphabet. Thereupon began a heated debate over whether the language should be called Romanian or Moldovan. Religion: during the period of Soviet rule, the influence of churches in Moldovan public life was limited by the religious policy imposed by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union: separation of church and state, exclusion of the churches from education, and subjection of the faithful to atheistic propaganda. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, however, all churches have undergone a revival and have striven to regain their former prominence. The overwhelming majority of ethnic Moldovans, Russians, Gagos, and Ukrainians are Eastern Orthodox Christians. There are also other Christians and smaller Muslim and Jewish communities. The Jewish community is overwhelmingly urban and began to enter present-day Moldova in substantial numbers after 1800, but its numbers have been greatly reduced by wars, pogroms, the Holocaust, and immigration. Less than 1/10 of Moldova's residents consider themselves non-religious. Economy of Moldova. During the communist era, a diversified industry was established in Moldova. Agriculture was modernized, and transport and the building industry were overhauled. Following independence, the government began the gradual transformation from a command to a market economy, establishing a program to privatize many state enterprises, primarily through distribution of ownership vouchers to the public. The transition has been slow and uneven because of corruption, lack of foreign investment, and other economic pressures. years. In the early 21st century, Moldova was among the poorest countries in Europe. Agriculture, forestry, and fishing. More than half of the country's land is arable, and most of that land is used to grow temporary crops. About 1/10 of the land is used to cultivate permanent crops. Agriculture has been highly mechanized, and almost all agricultural jobs are performed by machines. Virtually all landowners have access to electricity, and chemical pesticides and mineral fertilizers are widely used. Most Moldovan farmers dedicate large shares of land for export crops. There was no large-scale private farming during the Soviet period, but collective farmers did have small plots for their own use. Private land ownership, consisting primarily of small holdings, was initiated in 1990. The amount of privately owned land grew slowly at first, but proliferated after the advent of a government program of large-scale privatization in 1995. Conversely, collective farms and state farms began to diminish in importance. By the early 21st century, those who tended to privately own farms outnumbered those who worked on collective and state farms 10 to 1. Health and welfare. Since the mid-1990s, the quality and availability of health care in Moldova have improved. In 1991, the Moldovan government established social service programs to supplement the monthly income of the average citizen during the transition from a command to a market economy. These programs were designed to preserve and strengthen the social safety net put in place during the Soviet period. The Social Assistance Fund supplies the needy with medical payments and housing and food subsidies. The Social Security Fund provides pensions for workers, invalids, and soldiers, assists workers during illness or temporary disability, and aids the unemployed. Education. Significant changes occurred in Moldovan society during the Soviet era. The literacy was eradicated and, as in other Soviet republics, emphasis was placed on technical education in order to satisfy the steadily growing needs of agriculture and industry for specialists and a highly skilled workforce. Before 1940, the republic had only a few institutions of higher education and teacher training colleges, as well as a theological seminary and an agricultural institute. Since then, several institutions of higher education and numerous specialized middle schools have been established. Notable universities include the Moldovan State Agrarian University, the Moldova State University 1946, and the Technical University of Moldova 1964. They all provide instruction in Romanian and Russian, and since the early 1990s, the Moldovan language has increasingly been introduced into the educational system. Cultural life. The historical ties between Bessarabia and Romania and the ethnic kinship of Moldovans and Romanians are still reflected in the culture of Moldova. The development of Moldovan culture after World War II, however, followed the prevailing pattern of the Soviet Union as a whole. The state assumed responsibility for the content and direction of all cultural and intellectual life. The theater, motion pictures, television, and printed matter were subject to censorship and close ideological scrutiny. Until the waning days of Soviet influence, private initiative in cultural endeavors was rare.